Welcome back, everyone. Thank God it's Friday, August 26, 2022. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Today, we've got Phil Kerpen on again from AmericanCommitment.org. Phil, good friend of the show and of mine. And he joins us to talk about two different issues. We were originally going to start out talking about how Democrats are going to raid Medicare to pay for Obamacare again in the Inflation Reduction Act. This is about the Medicare drug pricing regime that the Inflation Reduction Act produces and how this is actually going to make things worse, and it's going to sap money that is supposed to be going elsewhere. But we end up getting first ahead of ourselves and started talking about the student loan bailout, basically the academia bailout. And Phil Kerpen reminds us that there's an Obamacare connection there too, so you're definitely going to want to stay tuned for that. Top stories today that we're working on. Jerome Powell declared war on inflation today, says it's going to be painful, it's got to get done, and the Fed is not going to let up until price increases zero out completely, which means that we're going to have a lot more rate increases. The PCE index number came out today at 6.3%. That's down from 6.8% last month, year on year. But that's only because we had a 1-month plateau or really drop in gas prices. So you see a drop in energy prices, which is translated into this half percentage point drop from the previous month's year on year. But that's due to falling demand for gas, which is not a good sign economically. This is not because we had a bunch more supply coming on. It's because gas sales fell, not just in price terms, but in real terms. Demand dropped. It's been dropping since the second quarter. Not coincidentally, so has GDP, as we learned this week again from the BEA, whose interim report on GDP shows that GDP declined 0.6%, down from the initial estimate of minus 0.9%, but that's because the trade gap was a little wider and definitely still weirder. If you take out that trade gap, if you zero out the trade imbalance, which was positive, which is almost never the case, you end up with a GDP in the second quarter annualized to around minus 2.2%. So Jerome Powell's looking at stagflation, and that's the reason why he declared war this morning on inflation, and clearly is unimpressed with Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, clearly is even less impressed with the fact that Joe Biden now wants to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on that bailout of academia, this trickle-down theory that somehow spending $500 billion is going to generate economic activity by alleviating the debt burden on professionals throughout the United States. Elizabeth Warren has been pushing this. I have a VIP column on another one of Elizabeth Warren's arguments today, which is that the price of college has gone up so fast that the government has to intervene. These people who are in debt can't pay it back because the price has gone up too much. Well, why might that be? Well, I have a few theories on that. First off, her math is bad, so you're going to have to struggle through that. But the reason why tuitions have gone up about 4 times in real dollars since 1964 is because in 1965, the government passed the first of its student loan programs, which was initially just targeted at disadvantaged students, but was expanded within about 25 years to anybody who wanted to take out loans. And what that did was it generated a huge amount of demand, which drove prices up. And now we're in a situation where the cost of a college education in this inflated tuition market no longer support the outcome. It's a bad investment. Basically, students are getting defrauded is what the issue is here. And if this was taking place at for-profit colleges and universities, Elizabeth Warren would be leading the charge to throw the people behind them in jail. Instead here, she's leading the charge for a bailout for the not-for-profit higher education institutions that are foisting this fraud on their students. I mean, when thousands of Lawrence Tribe's Harvard graduates can't make enough money to cover their student loans, according to him, there's definitely a problem. I mean, this is Harvard we're talking about. The the gilt-edged diploma that is the, sine qua non of higher education, and the buying power that buys does not cover the cost of its education. That's a fraud. That's a fraud, and it's a fraud that's created by government inflating the tuition market, and it's high time that we dismantle that program and return the universities and colleges back to a market equilibrium where they have to actually meter tuition based on the value of their education. That's not happening because the government's interfering in that calculation and has been for about the last 57 years, and especially over the last 30 years. Anyway, that's my VIP column today. You should check that out. Lots of other stuff coming up too, or it's already up at Hot Air. John Fetterman is spending $35,000 on private schools for his kids while refusing, while not supporting or opposing school vouchers, including, and this is a really interesting catch by the Washington Free Beacon. I'm assuming that this is Oppo research that got fed to them, but that's fine. A lot of stuff gets out that way. Because John Fetterman was posing as a public school parent as late as May of this year, when he sent out a tweet on May 4th that says, "American history must be taught in America's public schools, the good, the bad, and the horrific. We can't succumb to the Fox News and Newsmax lies. That's what Giselle Fetterman and I want for our kids." Well, if that's what they want for their kids, then why aren't their kids in public schools? They're not. They're in private schools. They're actually in a very expensive private school, very nice private school, very good private school. Again, this is, I'll say, Winchester Thurston School in Pittsburgh. The Winchester Thurston School in Pittsburgh is rated as Pennsylvania's 11th best private school in the entire state, and it has some diversity issues too, as the Free Beacon points out. So great topic there. All of a sudden, Mehmet Oz's crudité video doesn't look quite as appetizing, I'd say. And Fetterman's veggie tray posing is just that. This is a guy who is a collectivist in all other issues and is thoroughly supportive of the public school monopoly, except when it comes to his own kids. I don't think Pennsylvanians are going to cotton to that too much. We'll see. But I think that might be a bit of an issue. There's an important ruling in Texas, by the way, also on the Second Amendment. It's at the federal district court level, so it's not precedential yet, but it's one of the first cases to be decided after Bruin, and I think it's very interesting for that, but also interesting on the notion that you can limit civil rights based on the age of American adults. This particular judge completely disagreed. I explain why I think that that's the right call, and why I think that public policy tilted in that direction was always a bad idea, even before Bruin, but now after Bruin is even more clearly so. Anyway, stay tuned next. Phil Kerpen coming up from AmericanCommitment.org. We've got a great conversation, and unlike yesterday's, doesn't have a whole bunch of audio problems. I apologize for not being able to publish the great conversation I had with Dwayne Patterson yesterday. It was just really unlistenable, and we didn't catch that until well after the recording had been completed. So my apologies for that, but we do have Phil Kerpen today, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. Have a great weekend, folks, and don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show podcasts. Welcome back, everyone, to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining me today is Phil Kerpen of AmericanCommitment.org, at Kerpen, K-E-R-P-E-N, on Twitter. We're going to talk about a couple different things. Originally, when, we talk to Phil all the time. It's great talking. By the way, Phil, welcome back. It's always great talking to you.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.
So AmericanCommitment.org is where Phil's at. And we were originally going to talk about something he wrote at AmericanCommitment.org about Democrats wanting to raid Medicare to pay for Obamacare again, which we're going to talk about first. But we're going to leave some space to talk about this bailout of academia, because this is exactly what this is, what Joe Biden is trying to do. And I'm going to harangue Phil Kerpen, who is haranguable on this, because
there's actually an Obamacare connection on that one too, because when they first had the nationalization of student lending, was in the sidecar bill. Remember, they did the two
That's
bill
right.
strategy to pass Obamacare. It was the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act was the sidecar bill to get around Scott Brown's win in Massachusetts. And one of the pay-fors, one of the ways they were paying for Obamacare in that bill is that they claimed nationalizing student lending would increase money to the Treasury because now they'd make all the interest instead of the private lenders making it. And so this was supposedly going to make money for the government. And, now we're here 12 years later and it's probably going to lose $1 trillion or whatever it ends up being.
I was looking at this. I guess we'll talk about this first and we'll get to the other thing. But I was looking into this because I just, as we're recording this, I just posted a lengthy look at this student loan forgiveness plan. And, when Obama nationalized or all but nationalized the student loan program, you're right. I mean, it was on the basis of, well, we can do it better. The problems with the student lending is all about the evil private lenders, Obama argued. And so they nationalized it. I'd forgotten it was actually the sidecar to Obamacare, which, in retrospect, just makes
pay for it. It was supposed to make money.
So I went back and looked at my notes on this, because the nice thing about blogging is that you just go back and do a search on the admin side. You can find out anything that you've been writing. And by 2015, this program was in the hole by $22 billion, which was a larger hole than the EPA's budget and the Department of the Interior's budget put together. Right.
So it only took 5 years for them to go from it's going to raise $60 billion for taxpayers to we've already lost $25 billion.
Right.
So
exactly.
$85 billion in 5 years. And, here we are another 7 years later. And they're basically saying half of these loans don't need to be paid back. No problem. Enjoy.
Right.
Turning it into a gift after the fact. And, the word forgiveness is extremely deceptive because it's not like you can snap your fingers and it's gone, the debt's gone, and no one pays for it. The money was spent. The money was borrowed when it was spent or it was taxed when it was spent. And if it doesn't get paid back, then it has to be replaced in some form or fashion, either with higher taxes or with inflation. But it doesn't, the resources were spent when they went to the school.
Exactly.
There's no free lunch.
Yeah, as Robert Heinlein said, Ton Stoffel, right? There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And this has been a free lunch for academia, though, for decades. Even when
they can raise tuition through, especially under this latest version. If this survives, and by the way, I actually think that the media is doing a huge disservice when they treat this as a fait accompli, because I do think this will be litigated and it may be struck down. So it's not certain that this will survive judicial review, in my judgment. But if he actually does what he's announced they're going to do, it's not just the fact that a lot of existing loans are being bailed out, but on a going forward basis, he says income-based repayment is going to be just 5% of disposable income. And even if the payment is zero, the way they're setting the threshold, no interest will accrue. And then at the end of 10 years, if you're under a $12,000 balance, or 20 years if you're above that, it gets absolved. The whole loan's gone. And so on a going forward basis, if you're a university, you can charge essentially unlimited tuition. You could say our new tuition is $200,000 a year, but don't worry because you're only going to have to pay 5% of your income and then the loan will be gone. So it's like not a real debt for you. It's notional. Taxpayers are going to pay for it, not you. And so they're essentially saying on a going forward basis that any increase in tuition will be covered by taxpayers. And what happens when you send that signal to universities? And they're probably, they're getting ready to, if we think it's expensive now, they're probably getting ready to double it again.
That's exactly what they're going to do because there's no, there's no disincentives against it. We are removing the incentives for market-based equilibrium in tuition. And the thing that really struck me, and the reason why I ended up writing about this, the Washington Post editorial board, by the way, thinks this is a terrible idea, which, kudos to them. I'm a little surprised, but kudos to them. But I started thinking about it about the time that Lawrence Tribe said thousands of his graduates are going to be happy that they're going to benefit from this. And I'm thinking to myself, Phil, man, if we have a program that even Harvard graduates can't earn enough money to pay back, that program is an abject failure and should be shut down entirely. We should end student loans, student tuition loans, and and force colleges and universities to compete on the basis of price in an even market. That would probably solve a lot of the problems here. And I mean,
well, I mean, I think that what we should have, and there's actually bipartisan legislation that's pretty good, not perfect on this, that Dick Durbin and John Cornyn put in last year. But I think that what you should do is you should create circumstances in which student loans can be discharged in bankruptcies, which are very, very difficult to do now. You should probably have something like a 10-year waiting period so people don't do it right away when they're poor right after school. But if, somebody hits a rough patch in life, they can't make their payments and they need to go bankrupt, the whole idea of bankruptcy is you should be able to get a clean slate. So I think that with guardrails, we should allow for discharge in bankruptcy. But, and this is the crucial point, a significant portion should need to be a significant portion of the discharge debts should fall on the universities in those bankruptcies. So if someone does go bankrupt and they end up getting a discharge, something like half or a quarter, whatever, you could debate the exact amount. The university should have to pay that to the Treasury for their culpability in not setting someone up to succeed in life. And I think that if we did that, we would fix a lot of the problems of the messed up incentives that we have right now.
Well, I think that that's true. And I mean, if I'm a Republican, and which I'm not, and if I was going to be in Congress, which I'm not, and we had the majority, which is still debatable, I guess, I would start looking at taxing endowments to pay for this program and see how long academia.
There was a really small, teeny tiny endowment tax in the Trump tax bill. So it does exist now for the first time, but it applies to very few and it's very small. But that door's been kicked open just a tiny bit. And I agree with you. That's something that they should look at being a lot more aggressive with, because if we're massively subsidizing students to go to these institutions, and yet they're accumulating these enormous endowments. It seems only reasonable to say that they ought to be paying some of that in an excise tax on those endowments. And I think that's a huge political winner too. I mean, how do you in a campaign context, how do you argue against taxing Harvard's endowment? I mean, you can't.
Which is $53 billion, by the way. Their endowment right now is $53 billion.
They have some very good investment people there.
Yeah. Which is fine if they weren't sitting there, beating the drums for federal subsidies for tuition to their school. I mean,
with the Larry Tribe thing, I was thinking about this when I saw that tweet. I'm like, how many Harvard law grads have low enough incomes to qualify for this? Even if you have a spouse who doesn't work, you'd have to be under $250,000. And I'm like, it's all the government employees. That's who he's talking about, right?
Right. Yeah, that's who he's talking about. Which, by the way, there's already,
probably a lot of them working at the White House too.
I would imagine at least a couple of them are working at the White House, but there's already a public service loan forgiveness program. It existed prior to this. You do X number of years in some sort of public service job like social work or something like that, and you can qualify for some level of loan forgiveness for student loan forgiveness.
That's another aspect of this. One of the obvious things to conservatives is to say how unfair this is to people who paid their own way or didn't take out loans or didn't go to college or, had loans and managed to pay them off responsibly. But, there's another class of people who, maybe they went into the military because they wanted to get GI Bill, or maybe they went into one of these professions that has a special program at the state or federal level that pays for that. And you're basically telling all those people, whatever decisions you made, whatever sacrifices you made to qualify for that specific program don't matter because now everyone's going to get off the hook. And, that's another unfairness to this also.
Well, yes. There's a lot of different unfairnesses of this. The financial impact of the inflationary wave that it's going to generate is going to hammer the people who don't have the same type of level of disposable income as the people who are going to get the debt forgiveness in the first place. The Elizabeth Warren argument yesterday, I was on Dwayne Patterson's after show, right, on Wednesday night, and he played that clip for me. And the first thing I said, I don't know if you saw the clip, she was on CNN talking to, I think it was Bianca Golodriga, about this. And the first thing I said was, she's arguing trickle-down economics. Since when does Elizabeth Warren believe in trickle-down economics? The argument was, well, when you forgive this level of debt, well, then that's money that they can use in the economy, and that will make everybody, that makes everybody better because there's more economic activity that's going on. It's like, this is the trickle-down economics. First off, progressives' view of trickle-down economics is fundamentally flawed, but this is precisely what they're arguing against. In any other context, they would call this trickle-down economics, a benefit going to the wealthier.
They've got a big problem. They've got a big problem. None of their actual, policy beliefs are consistent with what they're doing. But this is just about rewarding a constituency.
Yes, it is.
And so they've decided to do something for political reasons, and then they have to backfit a policy rationale for it, but it doesn't really fit for the simple reason that people who go to college tend to be higher income than people who don't. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that. Some of the most successful people in the country, Bill Gates and whoever, that kind of thing. But as a class, by and large, you're talking about people who are higher income getting a benefit that is necessarily at the cost of people who are lower income because, the cost of paying for it is spread over the entire economy. And I don't think it's going to be in higher taxes because we see how this government operates. Everything just sort of goes on the national credit card. The Federal Reserve prints the money to buy the bonds. And so it's being monetized. And this is sort of, and it comes at a really bad time too, because, we had this spectacle over the last couple of years, since COVID started, of the federal government spending an extra $5 or $6 trillion, with 90% of it being essentially printed money, being Federal Reserve monetization. And of course, we had this huge bulge of inflation as a consequence of that. And we're starting to see it come down finally because, after all of that money gets created, it's sort of a one-time event. You should come back to something like trend inflation. And so we're finally starting to see some easing of these inflationary pressures because because they stopped massively adding more money. And then what happens? They say, okay, well, now we can do a $500 billion, debt bailout, student loan bailout. And, according to the new theory of the Constitution, you don't even need a vote in Congress to do it.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other thing, too. I mean, and the Washington Post, to its credit, also highlights that this is not legal.
Yeah. Well, I think what they're hoping is that nobody withstanding will sue them. It's one of the things about giving things to people as opposed to taking things from people is the people who are injured by it are much more difficult to identify in the sort of concrete way that you need to in order to get standing in a court of law. I think the best positioned potential plaintiffs to challenge this are the loan servicing companies because they get, I think, 1% of the loans as the fee for doing servicing and the processing and so forth. So they stand to lose a lot of the loans are discharged. But, what loan servicing company is willing to sue the government that their entire business depends on? And it's sort of it would take an awful lot of guts, I think, to do that. And so I don't think the private sector ones are likely to, which is why I think, if there's going to be a lawsuit, the most likely one might be the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority, MOHELA, which is one of the largest servicers and also happens to be an agency of the state of Missouri, which of course is a Republican state. And so maybe if the governor and AG there take a look at it, that could be the plaintiff in a lawsuit. But it's not really clear, who's going to be able to challenge this and get standing. I do think that if someone does, they have a very, very good chance of winning because if you read the legal memo that this administration put out, they don't even mention the major questions doctrine from West Virginia versus EPA. Right. They don't even mention the eviction moratorium. They just have an analysis of a bunch of old laws that they say, gives the Secretary of Education this authority. But we have all these very recent cases saying, you can't discover some huge new program in some old authority. Congress has to be very clear that they want it. And so I think the Supreme Court is going to get this case if it gets that far and basically say, what did we just tell you in West Virginia versus EPA? You can't conjure a vast new government program out of dusty old, code books. I think it should be a pretty clear 6-3 decision if it does get there. The question is, will anyone actually sue who can survive standing?
Yeah, I'm wondering too if maybe a minority caucus in Congress would have standing to bring a lawsuit?
It's
I'm
tough.
not sure.
Legislator standing, courts don't like that. They don't like taxpayer standing.
Yep.
One possibility might be that a bunch of states could sue on the theory that their state-supported educational institutions are disadvantaged because the whole the whole reason they massively subsidize them with appropriations is so that they can be less expensive than the private universities. And now the value of that's destroyed because all the people who went to the private universities don't have to pay it back. So that could be one theory that I've seen advanced. And the other possibility could be a school like Hillsdale that never took any federal funds, never participated in any of these programs, suing and saying, we didn't participate in any of these programs because we didn't want our students to be saddled with these debts. And now the debts are being forgiven. So that could also be a potential theory. But I really think the servicers have the best argument. They're directly losing a lot of business as a consequence of this. And so I'm hoping that one of them will sue.
Yep. Well, we'll see. I'm sure that there are lawyers working 24/7.
Some genius always comes up with something you never thought of. So yeah, the idea that you can do something illegal and just hope that nobody figures out how to sue you, that doesn't usually work out well.
Thankfully, does not usually work out very well, but we'll keep that in mind. We got to get to your piece, though. Democrats want to raid Medicare to pay for Obamacare again. They're already raiding the program that they used to pay for Obamacare, which we just got done discussing. Yeah,
this is the Manchin bill, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Although, by the way, officially they removed the name Inflation Reduction Act. And so the official name of the bill is like an act to provide for reconciliation under whatever resolution 14 or something. So, but no one's ever going to refer to a bill as that. So,
no.
Which is kind of funny, right? Because it was Build Back Better in the House. And then it was Inflation Reduction Act in the Senate. And then both those names were so embarrassingly stupid that they ended up passing it with no name. And it's kind of, anyway. But the spending side of that bill, it basically does two big things. It massively subsidizes green energy and electric vehicles and the whole Green New Deal and all that kind of stuff. By the way, including $350 billion in new loans and loan guarantees, which carry a zero cost in the CBO score. But as we have just learned, sometimes loans don't get paid back. So
good timing on that one.
That can be a source of additional large losses that are not reflected in the official score. But the other thing that it pays for is a 3-year extension in the supersized Obamacare subsidies that were put in on an emergency basis during COVID. And these subsidies, the original Obamacare went up to 400% of the federal poverty level, the subsidies. The new supersized subsidies have no income-based limit in terms of the federal poverty level. So now it's like what I think it's 8 or 9% of your income. And if that's what premiums cost, if the premiums cost more than that, taxpayers pick up the rest, even if you're a wealthy person. And so you have people making 500, 600, 700% of the poverty level, making $150,000 a year. If they're in a place like Massachusetts or someplace with very high premiums, they're going to qualify for subsidies. And so they've basically taken the lid off of Obamacare subsidies. And that also, by the way, because of the way it's set up, it basically tells the insurance companies any increase in the premiums is not going to be paid by your customers. It's going to be free money to them, that it's going to come directly from the U.S. Treasury. And so we've got this problem. It's always been there in Obamacare because most of the people who qualify, most of the people who buy it are the people who get subsidies because there's not much value to it at full price. And so we've always had this problem, but they're making it much, much worse by raising the roof. And the insurance industry, it's amazing they were able to do this. They basically didn't cut premiums for the 2 years during COVID where nobody was going to the doctor or hospital. Their claims went through the floor, and they didn't cut premiums. And they somehow got away with it. I guess they're going to send out some rebates or something, but they essentially got away with avoiding cutting. And so they had massive profits the last couple of years. And now as people are finally starting to go back to the doctor, go back to the hospital, utilization is not quite back to normal, but it's getting closer to normal. They're saying, oh my God, utilization is up so much, claims are up so much from last year, we have to have huge premium increases. And somehow Congress, either in their complicity or their stupidity, they don't say like, guys, it's coming back after a collapse. The increase is from, it's from a huge decrease. They don't say that. So what they say is, oh my God, we've got to run to extend subsidies or else people are going to be hammered by these premium increases. It's going to be terrible. And so they rush to get this done. And, they use their favorite pay-fors in this bill. They've got the IRS supersizing, which I'm sure you've talked about.
Oh, yeah.
They've got this tax on financial statement income. But the third one of the three big pay-fors is this Medicare price control provision, which essentially they use the word negotiation because it polls well, but it's not negotiation. It's the secretary setting the price, because if the company doesn't accept the secretary's price, they get taxed 95% of their total gross sales of that product, and you can't even deduct that tax from your corporate income taxes. So the projected revenue from that tax is zero, because no company would ever say no. And, you look at this and you say, well, what's the point? Why don't they just say the secretary shall set the price? Well, they don't say the secretary shall set the price because they want to go out on TV and in the articles from the adoring media and so forth. They want to say, we're having Medicare negotiate. It's negotiations to save you lots of money. But really, it's a price control. And when you use a price control, we've seen this in any market it's ever been tried. And there are only three things that can happen. You either get shortages, you get a reduction in quality, or you get black market activity, or you get some combination of the three. And what I think we're going to see if this actually takes effect, the effective date is 2026. Right. I think the drug companies may stop it from ever happening, and it just becomes a fake pay for, and it goes, the extra money on the deficit like usual. But assuming that it actually takes effect, the effect would almost certainly be a lot fewer drugs being developed, because you're taking, hundreds of billions of dollars directly out of that industry. And, that would grievously harm seniors. I mean, this idea that you could turn this into a positive, that you're using Medicare drug spending as a piggy bank for, Green New Deal and Obamacare subsidies, I don't know how it passes the laugh test. You can't spend $300 billion less on Medicare prescription drugs, not through any reform or efficiency, but just by government price setting, and not harm the recipients that are in that program, which is one of the reasons why, if I had to guess, I'd say it never actually happens.
Right.
4 years they
On the other hand, though, Phil, I mean, this is something that they've hammered for years and years and years, that they want the negotiation option for Medicare.
The negotiation's fine if it were a real negotiation. But, the thing is, CBO has been asked this question about 1 million times over the years. Like, would the secretary negotiating the price of drugs lower the price? And they say no, because the individual plans, the Medicare Part D plans, are already very aggressive in their negotiations. Right. It's not like the secretary is such a better negotiator that he can get a better price than the private plans do. So it's not the negotiations that are saving money. I have no problem with negotiation. It's the price setting. Right. It's the price setting that forcibly extracts money from the industry. But the other thing is, like, the way they wrote there, but there are other drug provisions here that are just perverse, that are just going to blatantly have the opposite effect of what they claim. So, for instance, they've got this inflation cap. You can't increase the price of drugs in a year more than the inflation rate. Well, drug prices have been going up about 2.5% a year. Inflation's been about 8.5%. So if the government now says, from going forward, there's a cap, you're not going to be allowed on an annual basis to increase more than the price of inflation, I think all the manufacturers will immediately go to the maximum. So they'll actually raise their prices more than they have been, because they know they won't have the flexibility in the future to set their prices based on market conditions. And they'll know all of their competitors are looking at the same situation, the same incentives, the same outcome. And so I actually think you're going to get bigger price increases by putting a cap on, because the cap is higher than where prices are running right now. And the other thing is, you're going to get much higher launch prices for new drugs, because they don't control the launch price. So if you say you can launch at any price you want, but then after that, you can only increase annually by inflation, new drugs are going to come to market at some insane price. And then they're going to, but the other thing too is, the price control only applies to the 15 drugs that Medicare spends the most on. So now you're telling manufacturers, like, okay, so you want to sell a lot, but don't sell too much, because you don't want to get put into the price control. And so now they've got an incentive to maybe price their drugs higher, not just because the launch price is the last time you get to set your price, but also because if you make the drug more expensive than the revenue maximizing point to, maybe make a little less, but keep your total sales lower, you can avoid being in that 15 that are subject to the price control. So I actually think that for most drugs that are not subject to the price control, the prices are actually going to go up under this regime.
Well, I think so too. And I think it's the George Clooney Up in the Air incentive. Do you ever watch the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney?
I have, but I don't know where you're going.
Oh, yeah, because I like to go in obscure directions, Phil. You know me. What's her name? And I can't think of the actress's name. She's really good in it too. Oh golly. Anyway, the one that plays Natalie Keener, his protege, while they're out on the road, she comes upon him while he's just about to sit down to dinner, and he's got 3 big plates of food in front of him. And she says, "Hungry much?" And he says, "Our reimbursement plan allows me $40 for dinner, and I spend every dollar of it because I want to maximize my miles." And I think that I think the drug companies are going to look at those.
Hit the maximum.
They're going to hit the maximum. They're going to maximize their miles because the miles are the goal. My apologies to George Clooney and to Up in the Air, which is a really good film, actually. But I mean, that's what happens. And I've actually seen this on the inside of, corporate America too, where people say, "Oh, well, I'm allowed $25 for dinner. So every dinner I eat is $25. I get $15 for breakfast. So every breakfast I eat is $15. I worked for a company that said, don't submit receipts unless you're over the limit.
Yeah.
So
Well,
what do you do? Every
You're right under.
Yeah. $24.99, $14.99. I mean, it's all nonsense. They spent $3 on a burger and fries. This is 30 years ago. $3 on a burger and fries, and they're marking down $15. Yeah, I mean those types of incentives, perverse incentives, create dishonesty, create waste, and create extra cost. And that's exactly what I think you're going to see, and that's what you're talking about here in your piece at AmericanCommitment.org.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're. I in the piece I mostly just focus on the price control, negotiation on the 15 big drugs, not so much some of these other things, the inflation caps and so forth. But I mean, the bottom line is, if they get away with this without much blowback, if AARP, which is basically an auxiliary arm of United Health, makes $750 million a year from them, and therefore is out promoting this stuff, if they can sell the public on this being a good thing. That you can take hundreds of billions out of prescription drug spending whenever you want to pay for another government spending bill. We're going to get more of it. We're going to see this as their go-to. Peter Welch, the congressman from Vermont, who's going to be moving into the Senate, he had a quote, he actually used the word slippery slope like a good thing. He was like, yeah, we only got 15 drugs, but this is the slippery slope. We're going to come back and we're going to get more, and we can do this.
Great.
We can now use it. So, I mean, this is now the game plan for them when they need to pay for some big government spending bill to say, people don't like the pharmaceutical companies, we'll take it out of them. And the problem with that is, drugs are, I know not everyone agrees with this right now with COVID but drugs are a good thing. Prescription drugs,
Absolutely.
Cures for diseases, medicines, it's a good thing. You want to incentivize more of them. We want to cure Alzheimer's. We want to cure Parkinson's. We want better cancer treatments. You've got to have the incentives for those things right. And I saw one analysis from Thomas Phillipson from the University of Chicago, who was a former Trump administration economist. He did an analysis. He has a model on how much money restrictions on drug pricing pull out of R&D in the private sector, the pharmaceutical industry. And he's got this bill scored as something like $500 or $600 billion reduction over the next 20 years. And, for cancer drugs in particular, he's got it at the reduction in private sector R&D spending on cancer drugs from this bill will be 9 times what the increase was of government funding for cancer under Biden's moonshot.
Yep.
So the private sector R&D is so big that if you mess up the incentives, that's much worse than anything government can make up for with its own grant funding and so forth. And so it really is going to have a big negative impact if these provisions take effect as written. Now, as I said, being the cynic that I am, and pharma now having 4 years to prevent something that's going to cost them hundreds of billions of dollars, I think they'll buy every politician in town to prevent it from happening. But, we'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, right? You put it up as 2026. And we'll see.
That's the reason why. That's the reason why they put it out to 2026 too.
Well, sure, because now their bill was paid for. It reduced the deficit. It reduced inflation. Now, when they change their mind in a couple of years, they'll get to collect all the campaign contributions in the interim. And who'll even remember? But if we're really being cynical.
Well, that's the thing about you and me, Phil. We've seen a lot, so we're cynical. And I know that if they were serious about it, it would have been in place next year. They're not serious about it. They kicked it down about 4 years, 4 years, so that people could forget about it and they could quietly get rid of it. So I agree with you. And even that would still be a better outcome than if they actually try to impose it. So that's a sad part of this. But even sadder is we're kind of out of time here. Phil Kerpen from AmericanCommitment.org at Kerpen. Is there any other place that we need to be looking for you?
Yeah, the other thing I do is I do a daily newsletter with John Fund and Steve Moore. If people want to get that, it's totally free. Committee2unleashprosperity.com for that.
There you go. John Fund, great guy, by the way. I got to get him back on here. So give John my best. I kind of miss him on the podcast. We got to do another podcast with him soon.
I'll mention it.
Okay. Well, I could probably mention it to him too. We follow each other on Twitter. So, that's it. And we know each other's emails. I should handle my own business, Phil. Yeah, but you know what? I think what I want really is a bailout. I need a John Fund bailout fund is what I need.
Very good.
All right.
All right, Ed.
Phil Kerpen, thank you so much. We will talk to you again soon.
All right. Have a good one.
All right, folks. Stay tuned for just a little bit more from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up right next. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. Anthony Fauci has announced his departure from his role with the NIH and, most importantly, as Joe Biden's chief medical advisor. By December, Fauci will depart these positions after 38 years in government. It's welcome news. Fauci serves more as a cautionary tale on the pandemic embrace of scientific leaders dictating public policy. While hardly alone in erring repeatedly, Fauci made himself the public face of a scientific technocracy that pushed top-down diktats and devastating lockdowns and access restrictions, almost none of which measurably improved public health. As Biden's advisor, he pushed unconstitutional mandates with little or no scientific foundation, leading the pushback against those who dared to question these eventually discredited policies. The past 2 years have provided us an object lesson on the failure of expert rule and why public policy should come from elected officials accountable to citizens. Let us remember Fauci by ensuring we never produce his like again. I'm Ed Morrissey. Thank you for watching and listening to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Be sure to subscribe at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube to get alerted as soon as new episodes get published. You can support the Ed Morrissey Show and Hot Air's VIP reporting by becoming a VIP member, too. Visit hotairvip.com and use the promo code SAVEAMERICA, all one word, for 40% off your membership. Choose VIP Gold and gain membership to access to all of the Town Hall sites. Thanks again for watching and listening.